everyone and welcome along. Can you believe it's come round to that time of year again where we're about to start the Watercolour Advent Calendar. I'm so excited and it's been so amazing getting all your orders for the Advent Calendar and the kit this year, so thank you so much. So this little video is a quick rundown of how things are going to work and just getting yourself prepared and ready if this is your first time doing the Watercolour Advent Calendar. Let's first look at what we've got. So I have got the pre-printed grid that many of you will have. I know some of you are creating your own and that's absolutely fantastic. But yeah, make sure you've got that ready for you. And then for the kit, I am going to be using the exact same paints and brushes as you've all ordered in the kit, just so we're all on the same page. So the Daler Rowney Aquafine set has 10 colours and they're labelled on the back very handily here, but also they are labelled inside. So I'm going to move this out the way for a second to keep it pristine. And I'm going to have a little look at this. Inside the kit you get a size 4 brush, which is fab, a great addition to the 0 and 4/10 you've got in your set. And then this is really cool, just a nice little guide of what the colours are underneath. Now the really useful thing about this set is you do have the lid, nice enamel lid here, to mix your colours in. However, if you need a bit more space, I'd recommend for when we get started with the calendar, bring in an extra, like a little saucer, a plate, or you might even have an extra little palette. So I'm going to have one of these to hand on the side. And the other thing that's really useful for watercolour painting, if you're not already into watercolour, is having a bit of kitchen paper, paper towel on the side as well to blot your brushes off. You're also going to need a jar of water. But what we're going to do is look at these colours today because they look quite dense and heavy in the palette, but when you add water to them they really transform, and so it's quite useful to make a little swatch sheet for yourself so you can remember what these colours look like when we add water to them. I cut myself a little bit of scrap watercolour paper to paint these swatches on, and I'm going to use my brushes. So the brand new brushes will have little tubes on the bristles, and that's for protection in transit. I mean, some people keep them on whilst they use them, I mean, you know, for general storage at home, but I find once they're out of transit you can get rid of them. But saying that, probably quite useful to hold on to those tubes if you paint plein air, if you go out and about and travel with your paints, because the other really cool thing about this set is it works really well as a travel kit. So I am just getting my brushes a little bit damp in the water. It's just a really good way of waking them up. And in terms of waking up your paints, we need to add water to these. If you've got a little spray bottle, that's always a good way to start these things off. So the first thing we're going to do is a little swatch chart. So I'm going to take the colours and just do a little rectangle of colour, cleaning my brush off really thoroughly each time, and that's what the paper towel is great for. If you start with your lightest colours first, it's easier to keep your water jar nice and clean, or to refrain from becoming swamp water too soon. So I'm just picking up a little bit of paint. It's quite sort of thick in consistency, but even with that you can see the lovely vibrant colours. Cleaning the brush off each time, making sure your brush is wet and your paint is a little bit wet, and just enjoy making a swatch. So there's our set of swatches up in the corner, and now I want to talk to you about mixing colours, because we've got a nice range of tones here, but there are so many more colours out there in the world and in Advent that we're going to want to create from this limited little palette. So let's look at some mixing. I've got just another piece of scrap watercolour paper to try these on. I've also got a pencil, little HB pencil, just to make a note if I want to. Now, in terms of mixing colours with these 3 brushes, you want to use your largest brush to do that because it's going to pick up the colour fastest and most easily. And if I just put that up there and get my extra little palette in, I've got some space for mixing. Even though this is quite good, you can either mix in wells, mix in that section. It's a pretty nifty little palette. Okay, so the first thing I'll talk about is when you mix 2 colours together, you want to be sort of careful with how you introduce one colour into the next. Watercolours are quite delicate by their very nature, so you can overpower a colour like yellow quite easily with something like blue if you don't go carefully. So, for example, if I take cadmium yellow, so I'll pop some in here, and I've got quite a large amount of yellow here. I've got it probably at a milk consistency, and what I need to make sure is when I introduce another colour, I've got to have it at the same consistency. So I'm going to take, oh look at that, I need to clean my brush off properly, really get that yellow off. So I'm going to really sort of rub the brush up against the side of the jar and clean it off. Lovely, much better. I'm going to bring in a very small amount of blue. So I'll just get some ready on the other side of the palette, and then I'll clean my brush off just to rid it of too much colour. And I'm going to introduce a little bit in. What I like to do is when I'm colour mixing, I'll start with a swatch of the pure colour on its own, just having not had anything introduced into it. And now take the tiniest bit of blue, and look, already we've got a new colour. It's amazing how fast the influence of a dominant colour like blue can make its presence felt. And the great thing is we're finding some lovely green tones. So I keep cleaning my brush off and blotting it each time, introduce in a little bit more each time, and lo and behold, we will start to get a nice range of green tones. Introduce in a bit more, and you'll find that the greens you get with this Prussian blue, oh no, beg your pardon, with ultramarine blue and cadmium yellow will be slightly different to if you were to choose lemon yellow, which is our other yellow in here, and the Prussian blue as well. So there you have a really nice example of a far more interesting array of green tones in this case than maybe you've got there and there. Let's try, if I turn my palette wheel round, let's try something a bit different. We'll try yellow ochre. So I'll get a lot of that mixed in. Always make sure you've got a nice amount of liquidity for these mixes. So I'm getting a nice amount of water in there, good movement of colour. And I'm spending lots of time cleaning off my brush in this instance because we really want to try and get our colours mixing true. And now I'm going to take some Alizarin Crimson, and I'm getting it mixed up in a separate well. By the way, this might feel a bit laboured, but the minute you just become more and more comfortable with mixing up colours, you won't have to do it in quite so sort of formal an approach. You'll get quicker and quicker and be able to do it in less times, just cleaning that brush off, getting all that colour off. Okay, so as I did before, I'm going to put my yellow ochre in on its own, clean that brush off and start to introduce in a little bit of Alizarin Crimson, because I know lurking in this mix somewhere It's quite a nice blush colour. And it might seem a bit strong and a bit too heavy, but we're also going to see what happens when we just dilute our colours back a bit as well. You may also find that your colours hit a point where they can't sort of change anymore. So if I get a bit more of that and just drop that in there. Like, I don't think we're going to get much further beyond this colour here. However, what I think is interesting is what happens if I add a lot more water to these mixes and get a lovely diluted colour. So let's see, if I take a clean wet brush, really get it clean, what happens if I stretch the colour out, clean wet brush, and we get some really nice paler tones, maybe good for some petals. So you can see actually what's going on here is you've got different colours that can be mixed from the different amount of one colour to another, but you've also got the light and dark, which we call value. So a deeper value, a darker value, a lighter value creates all these beautiful watercolour tones that we know so well. The thing I'm often interested in is the combination of blue and brown in my palette, because we've got burnt sienna and yellow ochre, and then we've got Prussian blue and ultramarine blue, because mixing together a blue and a brown is going to give you a range of grey tones that are going to be really useful to you. But you can see this one, which is burnt sienna and Prussian blue, has got a greeny feel to it, which might not always be what you want. Whereas if I mix burnt sienna and French ultramarine, I'm going to get a much deeper, richer grey tone that's more akin to sort of charcoal tones, which will be really handy if I want to do a silhouette or Santa's boot buckle, belt buckle, something like that. And then if I try yellow ochre with these two, I'm going to get a different colour again, which might be useful for, I don't know, let's see what this one gives us. Ooh, that's really green, isn't it? So that's not really a very useful colour when we've got all of these things mixed up. Let's see what it brings us for this. So it's just really, really important to have a play with your colours if these are new to you. Oh, that's quite an interesting tone. Still quite greeny, isn't it? Okay, so there you see. I suppose yellow ochre is near yellow and blue do make green tones, so that makes sense. So like I say, it's just really important to get to know your paints before you sort of embark on this advent calendar. And of course, if you are painting along with me with the same kit, at least I'll be able to be sort of talking you through what I've come up with. Now, the last colour I want to show you is a mixture of burnt sienna, Alizarin Crimson, get in there too, that's quite dominant, isn't it? We'll get a bit more burnt sienna, and then adding in French Ultramarine Blue to give us a really intense, deep, dark colour that's almost got a slightly sort of aubergine-y tone. But if I keep on adding blue into it, it's going to be a really fab, very deep dark colour if I do want to try and sort of create a full black tone. So I find that a very useful mixture of basically red, blue and brown. I used the Alizarin Crimson there. So there you have a nice little walkthrough of your paints. So for our starting of the Advent calendar, just make sure your brushes are nicely warmed up, that you've got to know your paints and what they can do, that you've got a spare little saucer or palette somewhere, and then a pencil and an eraser is always a good idea because we're going to be learning the drawings as well as the painting, because of course all your grid squares are blank. But there is one last thing that you might want to get ready. Those of you who've done the Advent calendar with me over recent years will know that we always have our very own calendar door that I open on each day, and it's very silly and a bit of fun, but I just thought I'd show you this year's design because I've added a little bit of gold, a little bit of metallic watercolour onto it. But essentially what I did is I measured the grid square and I gave it an extra little sort of 1/2 centimetre that I could fold and make a hinge, and then just cut out the top corner to create a space so I could see each day what number it is. And like I say, you don't need to do this because of course I'm opening the door on your behalf each day. But what I do is I put a little bit of blue tack there and then hold it down so that we can see what's behind the door each day. Anyway, I get a lot of questions asking me how to make the door, and so I just thought I'd let you know. And then of course you can put whatever design you want on the front. I thought this was rather nice for this year. So that's my door. And then the last thing to mention is this random bit of watercolour paper. When I'm doing particularly the top lines, it's a really good idea to just have a piece of paper, it doesn't need to be watercolour paper, to just be able to protect the rest of your grid. Because, obviously you don't want to spill paint and things on the squares, but also just there's natural sort of greases and oils in your hands, however clean they are. And what we want to do is try and keep the rest of the page as pristine as possible so that the paint can go on really nice and cleanly. So that's quite enough from me. I will see you on the 1st of December. If you haven't got yourself an Advent calendar grid yet, you can always buy the digital version, which is available to download immediately and print off at home. Obviously, you need to make sure that your printer can take watercolour paper through it. Not all can. Or create your very own grid in your sketchbook or on a piece of paper. And I will see you on the 1st of December.